Hey everybody, welcome to Black Spring. Now, after receiving criticism from the president, the director of the WHO organization, that would be the Director General, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, actually offered a bit of an address to President Trump's criticisms of China's early handling of the pandemic, as well as the claims that the WHO was too accommodating to the quote Chinese government. Now, today I would like to share with you a couple of things on this segment. Today we have a response from the World Health Organization, complete with a shout out to Lady Gaga and Hollywood. Now, for many, this is a bit of change in the tone from the infamous Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus. And I'd like to thank everybody for joining me on this segment of Black Spring.
And communities everywhere. I would like to thank the African Union, the governments of United Arab Emirates and Ethiopia, the JACMA Foundation, and all our partners for their solidarity with African countries at this critical moment in history. And I would like to thank President Ramaphosa and the chairperson of the Africa Commission, Moussa Faki, for their leadership. The Solidarity Response Fund has now generated almost 150 million US dollars from 240,000 individuals and organizations. This Saturday, some of the biggest names in music are coming together for the One World Together at Home concert to generate further funds for the Solidarity Response Fund, but not just to raise funds, to bring the world together, because we're one world, one humanity, and fighting a common enemy. And I thank Lady Gaga, the global citizen, and all that are participating in putting this concert together.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me for this segment of Black Spring with Autumn. And now I'd like to offer you a highlight from the actual response. Thank you so much for tuning into this segment of Black Spring with Autumn.
Just to add, Helen, and Maria's there really speaking about seroepidemiologic studies where the testing is done in validated labs as well, where the testing is bench done in labs. There's the whole other world of rapid diagnostic tests or point-of-care diagnostics, and people are talking very much about can we do the diagnosis at the bedside, either PCR-based or there are new diagnostic tests based on antigen detection, and what they do is they detect the proteins of the virus in the sample, or rapid diagnostic test based on the antibody that's developed by the body in response to the virus. And there's a lot of very important innovation going on in that space. But there are real, we need to be very, very careful. Antigen tests, the sensitivity of those tests can be low. In other words, they may pick up anything from 30 to 80% of true infections. In other words, you can have people who get a negative test who actually have had the infection. The same with some of the antibody tests. The important consideration with antibody tests is that many people take up to 2 weeks or more to develop the antibodies in response to having the infection. So they could actually turn out to be negative on the antibody test, but actually have had the infection. Now, none of those are barriers to introducing these products as part of a comprehensive strategy, but we do need to be careful to ensure that introducing rapid tests is done as part of a comprehensive diagnostic strategy, a comprehensive testing strategy, and where governments can have validated tests that they introduce into the system in a way that adds to the control of the virus, that adds to surveillance, that adds to diagnosis, and doesn't cause unnecessary confusion. And many governments around the world are doing that just now.
Thank you very much for this.
This next question is from EFE News Agency. We have Antonio. Antonio, can you hear us?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yes. Thank you for taking my question. So the main accusations of the U.S. President to WHO are that the organization failed to confirm in the first weeks of January that there was human-to-human transmission, and also that it opposed flight restrictions from China to U.S. and other countries. What has WHO to say in its defense?
As the DG said, we will be examining all of the actions taken by everybody in this. So in that sense, the idea of having a defense at this point seems rather strange. In the first weeks of January, WHO was very, very clear. We alerted the world on January the 5th. Systems around the world, including the US, began to activate their incident management systems on January the 6th. And through the next number of weeks, we've produced multiple updates to countries, including briefing multiple governments, multiple scientists around the world on the developing situation. And that is what it was, a developing situation. The virus was identified on January the 7th. The sequences were shared, I think, on the 4th and 12th with the world, where we're dealing with a completely new virus. All potential respiratory pathogens in the initial reports, in which there were no mention of human-to-human transmission, was a cluster of atypical pneumonia or pneumonia of unknown origin. There are literally millions and millions of cases of atypical pneumonia around the world every year, and in the middle of an influenza season, sometimes it's very difficult to pick out a signal of a cluster of cases. In fact, it's quite remarkable that such a cluster was picked out, 41 confirmed cases ultimately in a cluster in Wuhan. There is always a risk with respiratory pathogen that it can move from person to person. We've seen with MERS, for example, can spread from person to person, but in very particular environments, as we've seen, in an occupational environment, in healthcare environments. And when WHO issued its first guidance to countries, it was extremely clear that respiratory precautions should be taken in dealing with patients with this disease, that labs needed to be careful in terms of their precautions in taking samples, because there was a risk that the disease could spread from person to person in those environments. There is a difference between the potential for human-to-human transmission. For example, avian influenza H5N1 can spread from person to person, but it doesn't spread efficiently in community settings. It can spread in specific settings, like a family, occupational, or healthcare environment, but it doesn't tend to spread at community level. The determination was not whether or not human-to-human transmission was occurring. The determination was the virus spreading efficiently at community level outside those environments. And that is not an easy determination to make, and one has to make that very carefully. So from that perspective, we'll be very happy when the after-action reviews come. In fact, I am very anxious for those after-action reviews to come, because we do them for every outbreak response, and I'll be delighted with our teams and look forward to that engagement, to look and see where we can learn to do better, where we can improve our response. With regards to flight restrictions, and I've certainly been on the record on a number of occasions saying that the implication or the imposition of flight restrictions by countries is the sovereign right of any member state. WHO does not control the law on this. WHO's only function under the IHR is to challenge member states who put in place restrictions to ensure that they have a public health justification for imposing those restrictions, and that we are bound then to share those justifications with other countries who may be affected by those flight restrictions. That is the role of WHO, to ensure that restrictions on flights are public health based, evidence based, limited to controlling the disease, have a balanced impact on travel and trade, and are short-lived and only of a duration to control the public health event of concern. that's the framework. The international health regulations is a framework negotiated by 194 countries. We simply implement that framework on behalf of our member states.
So just to add to that, so exactly as Mike said, what in the beginning of an outbreak, I actually went back and listened to my press conference on the 14th of January because it was a significant event for me. It was my first press conference I've ever done. But in terms of the outbreak itself, I laid out what are the things we need to know. And at the time, there were 41 confirmed cases. And Tarek was with me at that press conference. And what I outlined were 6 things. I outlined what is the pathogen? How do we identify what this is? And at the time, we had learned that it was a novel coronavirus, and that sequence was shared. That the pathogen was identified. It hadn't been shared yet, or I'm sorry, it was shared on the 12th of January. We needed to know the source of the outbreak. How were people getting infected, including a possible animal source? Because all of our experience with other coronaviruses and emerging respiratory pathogens, most of those come from an animal source. We call those a zoonotic spillover event. We needed to know what disease it causes and how to care for people. We need to know the modes of transmission, including if there is any human-to-human transmission, what is the extent of transmission. We needed to know how to limit exposure and what to do, what is the extent of infection. And so all of our guidance that was out before we did that press conference was about limiting exposure to people and to prevent transmission, particularly in healthcare settings, because all of our experience with SARS and with MERS showed that those viruses could have explosive transmission and amplification in healthcare facilities. And so we wanted to ensure that frontline workers were protected. And so our guidance that was put out was about respiratory droplets and contact protection. And so all of that was out on the 10th and the 11th of January.
Thank you very much. I do remember that.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining me on this segment of Black Spring with Autumn. Now, here's the tag. Now, the irony here is that this response seems to be led by the 2 other doctors, not the Director General Tedros Adhanom. It's actually being led by these 2 doctors, Dr. Kirkov and Dr. Ryan. Now, it's, if with the director not having a whole lot to say, it does bring about the issue of credibility. What's his actual medical expertise? It's looking more like he's more of a bureaucrat, but he's also serving. He's making decisions, or he's leading a response or a mismanagement in a response to a pandemic. So there's a bit of irony there in terms of the reliability and the credibility of who's actually leading this actual organization's response and the measures that they took to communicate. Not to mention, there's a bit of inconsistency. If you continue with this particular excerpt, you will find that it seems even between Dr. Kirkov and Dr. Ryan that they can't quite settle on the dates in which that they made the nation states aware of the data that they had, the date as well as what they were measuring with that particular data. Now, if you are noticing that there was also a actual shout out to, of course, Hollywood, and of course this is just a part of the segment that I wanted to highlight. This is what the mobilization of these globalists and these elite do when they want to convince or try to persuade philanthropists and people to come together. They always use the Hollywood lights, or what they do to illuminate their cause. Or in this case, he shouts out Lady Gaga, who's basically, you might be wondering, well, what's her medical expertise? For the average person or people that are actually not really paying attention to what's going on, her credibility is in entertainment. It's in singing. It's in movies. It's in theater. There's not. So her credibility is, they're using her credibility from her entertainment industry experience to pad the response for basically not responding for their own purposes. They're not really, they failed with their response, and now they need to raise money because now the world is going to see that, President Trump is defunding this World Health Organization. So they basically, deployed their army or their legions of from Hollywood to start raising money for this horrible pandemic. So it's interesting that they would use, of course, it's interesting, but yet typical for them to use a celebrity platform to build their balance of rhetoric in this situation. So I'd like to thank you for joining me on this segment of Black Spring. And of course, as always, I'd love to know what your comments and what your concerns are. Do you think that that it's fair to assume or fair to say, or that there's enough evidence to say that the WHO did not respond adequately to nation states, to governments, to scientists in terms of this pandemic? Or do you think this is another effort amongst the shadow elite to drive their agenda? In fact, if you hang out long enough in this particular segment, you will find that climate change is also being blamed for the conditions and the humidity and the droplets of moisture that could potentially contribute to this pandemic. And as always, I'd like to thank everybody for joining me on this segment of Black Spring with Autumn. Have a great day.